everybody, welcome back to my channel. So a while back we made a video all about ADHD and how it impacts sex and dating and relationships, and there were a lot of requests in the comments of that video to do a similar video but about autism. Now, I am not autistic, but we really wanted to make this video resource for you, and so my assistant Moog and one of the script writers that I work with, Quinn, who are both autistic, worked on this video with me. It's also important to note that, like with ADHD, this is a massive topic, and I'm going to try and give as broad an overview as possible, but it's not going to be possible to cover every single nuance. If you're autistic and you don't feel like this video is reflective of your own experiences, that doesn't make your autism any less valid. Even the two autistic people who worked on this video with me both had very different experiences. And before we dive in, I just want to say that while autism does impact people's experiences of sex and dating and relationships, it isn't always necessarily a negative impact. It's just something that's useful to be aware of because different people approach these things differently. So let's get into it. What is autism? Definitions and diagnoses. Autism is a neurodivergence, which means that the way you think about and experience the world is different to most people. Signs of autism in adults include finding it hard to understand what others are thinking or feeling, getting very anxious about social situations, finding it hard to make friends or preferring to be on your own, seeming blunt, rude, or not interested in others without meaning to, finding it hard to say how you feel, taking things very literally, not understanding social rules such as not talking over people. Autism is not an illness or a disease, and there is no need for a cure. There is no agreement within the autistic community about whether or not autism is a disability, and it's considered a spectrum because it is different for every autistic person. Some autistic people may need very high levels of support and care, while others may not. No one is more autistic than anyone else, but everyone's needs are different, and there'll be some sections in this video that may not apply to autistic people who require higher levels of support. The word for people who aren't autistic is allistic, and it's really useful to use this kind of language because it helps to normalize that autistic people aren't weird and allistic people aren't normal or the default. Also, autistic people are autistic their whole lives, but some may be diagnosed as children and some as adults. And it's also important to note that not everyone can access or wants or needs a formal diagnosis. Which means it's time to talk about how misogyny is built into science and medicine. Yay! Gender and transness. Both historically and currently, research into autism focuses on cis white boys and men, and so diagnostic criteria is designed with them in mind. This leads to women, people of marginalised genders, and people of colour being less likely to be diagnosed. Young girls and children of marginalised genders are often held to a different standard to boys. We're often expected to be more mature, handle our own and others' emotions at a much earlier age than cis boys, and so autism is often missed or misdiagnosed. While not every autistic person wants or needs a formal diagnosis, it's important that research and conversations about autism become more inclusive of people who aren't white cis boys. Interestingly, research has shown that trans and non-binary adults are between 3 to 6 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism. And I actually have an episode of my podcast doing it with Yen Perkis and Dr. Wen Lawson, who co-authored the Autistic Trans Guide to Life. And so I definitely recommend checking that out if you're interested in learning more. Okay, so not every autistic person is a cis white man, but what other myths are there about autism? Myths about autistic people. Autistic people don't have any social skills. Autistic people can't have sex. Autistic people can't fall in love. Autistic people can only have relationships with other autistic people. These are all very, very wrong. The myth that autistic people aren't capable of romantic love is incredibly harmful and hurtful and has been debunked by researchers. Autistic people might approach sex, dating, and relationships differently to allistic people, but that doesn't mean that they can't do these things if they want to. And one of the things that impacts autistic people's experiences of sex and dating is the assumption that they don't have the agency to do these things. The infantilisation of autistic people. Like other disabled and neurodivergent people, autistic people are often infantilised and have choices made for them, even when they do have the capacity to make their own decision. Autistic people are often seen as non-sexual or childlike and innocent, but many autistic people have and enjoy sex. Another aspect of this infantilization is believing that autistic people can't make their own decisions about their sex life or give meaningful and informed consent. There will be some autistic people who need support in making decisions, but as much as possible, autistic people should be given agency over their own bodies and lives. something which even today often doesn't happen. Just like some autistic people, some allistic people don't have the capacity to give informed consent, but we don't say no allistic people can give consent as a blanket rule. Another issue is how we often speak over autistic people and look to allistic experts for autistic people's experiences of sex, dating, and relationships, rather than looking to autistic people themselves. There are lots of autistic people talking about their experiences of sex and relationships, and there are autistic sex educators. An autistic sex educator that I highly recommend you checking out is Millie Evans, and of course Quinn, who wrote the script for this video. He is a trans and autistic sex writer, and I highly recommend you checking him and his work out. The desexualization of autistic people means that we rarely get to see depictions of what sex and dating and relationships look like for them, and the depictions that we get of allistic people aren't always great either. Strict sexual scripts and rigid relationship rules. The dominant sexual scripts and relationship rules are unhelpful for all of us, and this is especially true for people who belong to marginalized groups like autistic people. Sexual scripts in mainstream media and porn give us a formula to follow in sexual interactions. But that formula is often really restrictive, gendered, and cis heteronormative, such as the idea that it should be the man who always initiates sex. We also have a whole bunch of unwritten rules around dating and relationships, such as the classic, you have to wait 2 days after a date to text someone back, otherwise you'll seem too keen. To autistic people, navigating sex and dating can feel like everybody has been given this book with all of the rules in it, and you're the only person who hasn't read it. Autistic people may rely on the sexual scripts that they've seen in TV shows and films to understand what to do when navigating sex and relationships, which often isn't helpful because those models are very limited. They are filled to the brim with people ignoring other people's boundaries, strict patriarchal gender roles, and just one kind of cis heteronormative sex. This not only might give autistic people the impression that the right way to be in a relationship is to ignore somebody's boundaries to show your love for them, but also that they should let other people ignore their own boundaries. Something that Moog said is that they often look at cis, straight, allistic people trying to date each other and have sex without actually talking about what they want, just like, what are you doing? Because no one seems to be enjoying it. We're not going to be able to eliminate all of these sexual and social scripts, but sex education is, or at least should be, a place where we can learn to question them and break them down. Sex education is failing autistic people. Autistic people are often denied the same limited sex education that abled people get, based on the assumption that they won't have sex and so therefore don't need it. And even when they do get access to sex ed, it often isn't inclusive of them. It's so common for us to use language like down there and expect everyone to know what we're talking about, but it's important to be specific. Do you mean the vulva, the vagina, the anus, your knees? An autistic person might struggle to understand what they're supposed to infer without more context or information. And while we're moving towards better sex education in schools, there's still a lot of shame and awkwardness in sex ed classes, and teachers may not be comfortable or experienced themselves in teaching sex ed. An autistic person who might not be aware that sex is a topic that you're not supposed to talk about might be curious and openly ask questions, which is great, by the way, but because of these bullshit scripts, they might end up getting teased by classmates or even shamed by an embarrassed teacher. An example of this is the character Lily in the Netflix show Sex Education, who isn't explicitly autistic, but many people think that she is written as autistic. She is very open about wanting sex, and she's seen as weird because she can ask for what she wants. So sex education that is inclusive of autistic people might look like using the anatomically correct names for body parts rather than slang, ensure any videos that are used have subtitles for folks who may have an auditory processing disorder, not making assumptions about who can and can't have sex, conversations about consent and how to say no and set boundaries, and discussions of ways to have sex that aren't just penis in vagina penetration. Because if we're told that sex is PIV, then autistic people might take that literally and think that that is the only way to have sex, even if it's something that they don't want. Everyone would benefit from talking more explicitly about consent, not just autistic people. And many autistic people do approach conversations about sex with a lot less shame. Explicit communication and consent. Autistic people are often very direct and prefer things to be said out loud and clearly rather than inferred by context. When it comes to sex, they might prefer for consent to be very explicit and verbal. For example, an autistic person might struggle to read the signals another person is giving them of leaning in and wanting to be kissed, or they might want to check in and ask for consent every time they do something that allistic people in relationships often take as a given, like kissing. For some autistic people, this comes from a sense of not understanding the rules of a society designed for allistic people and wanting to be extra careful around things like sex so that they're not breaking any of these often unwritten rules. Because of all of this, there are a lot of autistic people who really enjoy BDSM, which has explicit consent and negotiations built into it with things like safe words and check-ins. Autistic people often prefer direct communication rather than uncertainty, and so they might ask questions that we are taught are needy, such as, do you like me? Or do you want to be in a relationship with me? Which, in my opinion, are really great questions to ask. I talk all of the time about how important communication is, and the direct communication about wants and needs and boundaries and feelings that autistic people often prefer is an amazing way to build a healthy relationship. Another thing is that autistic people are often taught that their needs are unreasonable and they struggle to say no, not because they don't understand consent, but because they don't feel like a small amount of discomfort is something that they're allowed to make a fuss over, or because they've been told that they are difficult for setting boundaries. For example, the expectation to hug or kiss or shake hands when you meet someone might be intensely uncomfortable for an autistic person who struggles with casual touch. The expectation that we should engage in physical touch even when we're not comfortable with it is one that we are taught right from when we're little kids. And there's a really simple solution to this. You can just ask. And it doesn't have to be a super formal thing. Recently, when I met Quinn in person for the first time since we started working together, I asked him if he was a hugger or not before we hugged. While autistic people prefer direct communication, social situations are governed by allistic communication styles, making them difficult to navigate for autistic people. Cues, tones, and context. Autistic people can struggle with picking up tones, especially when communicating by text when there are no other contextual clues. They might not notice or be able to interpret social cues, and sometimes it can feel like allistic people are speaking an entirely different language. Written tone tags like /s to indicate sarcasm that are often used in online forums and social media platforms can be really useful. Autistic people are often told that they're being rude or sarcastic when they're asking genuine questions or just sharing their opinions. Because of this, many autistic people feel like they can't trust their own interpretations of other people's tones or intentions. This means that they might find it really hard to tell if someone is flirting with them or even if someone is angry with them. All of this can lead to confusion and conflict in relationships because we're supposed to be able to tell when our partner is upset or when they're trying to initiate sex. It can be really helpful to specify what tone you're trying to convey, even if you're having an in-person conversation, and not just if you're dating an autistic person. Autistic people aren't the only people who benefit from the implicit being made explicit, and it can be really sexy to hear somebody saying, "Oh, and by the way, this is me trying to flirt with you." And speaking of flirting, fidgeting, focus, and flirting. Eye contact is a big part of how allistic people flirt and show that they are confident and comfortable around another person. And for allistic people, this is mostly done subconsciously, but eye contact can be incredibly uncomfortable for autistic people. Imagine the scenes that we're taught are really romantic, like eye gazing on a date or staring intensely into each other's eyes during missionary sex. These could be an absolute worst nightmare scenario for autistic people. And to help them, autistic people often engage in self-stimulatory behavior, which is more commonly referred to as stimming. Stimming usually involves repetitive movements or sounds, and it isn't unique to autistic people. But it might be more obvious in them as it's an important way that autistic people self-regulate to stay grounded in the moment or regulate their feelings. There is a huge amount of stigma associated with stimming, and it is often read by allistic people as rudeness or not focusing. The reality is that stimming isn't shameful, and it actually helps autistic people focus. And stimming can happen during sex too. Someone who is autistic might need to play with a fidget toy whilst you're going down on them, otherwise they might feel overstimulated and uncomfortable. An autistic person stimming during sex doesn't mean that they're not into what you're doing or into you, but as a partner you might find it distracting or annoying, and so that's where communication is key. It's really helpful to figure out what everyone's needs are during sex, and if stimming is involved, what it means and what it doesn't. One of the things that stimming helps autistic people with is sensory processing, which can in itself impact sex and dating. Sensory processing and sex. Some autistic people process sound, light, smells, taste, and touch differently to allistic people and have increased sensitivities to them. Smells, noises, and textures that allistic people might not even notice might be the only thing that an autistic person can focus on, and it might be really distressing to them. Lots of traditional date venues like bars and restaurants and clubs can be a sensory nightmare for autistic people. And some autistic people are uncomfortable with casual touch, but that doesn't mean that they don't want or enjoy sex. Although sex brings a whole bunch of different sensory situations with it. Lots of various fluids, smells, and sounds that can potentially be very overwhelming for an autistic person. And something that is really important to communicate with your partners about is what happens during sensory overwhelm. Sensory overwhelm and meltdowns. Autistic meltdowns are a response to sensory overwhelm, and while they're often characterized as autistic people being difficult or throwing a temper tantrum, they're a result of too intense sensory input for an extended period of time, and often needs being unmet. During sensory overwhelm, anxiety levels spike, and an autistic person may seem on the verge of a panic attack. Some autistic people go nonverbal when they're overwhelmed, even if it's the kind of good overwhelm that can happen during sex. It's really important to discuss what you'll do if a meltdown occurs during a date or sex or even an argument. Building healthy relationships requires trust, which means that autistic people need to feel that they can be vulnerable around their partners and not be judged for their response to sensory overwhelm or any other needs. Masking expectations and autistic needs. Masking involves suppressing certain behaviors that autistic people find soothing, but that others think are weird, such as stimming. There's loads of pressure on autistic people to act the same as allistic people because our society sees neurotypical abled people as the norm. Many autistic people are shamed into suppressing behaviors that help them and internalize ideas that they have to change and, massive air quotes here, be normal to be worthy of love. When you've been told both explicitly and implicitly that you have to hide who you are, it can be really difficult to show up as your authentic self in relationships. Discussing these needs so everyone is on the same page is so important because autistic people deserve relationships where their needs are recognized and they can show up as their full selves. Now, because I'm allistic, I wanted to make sure that this video included the voices of autistic people, so I asked on my Instagram for your experiences of sex and relationships. So let's go. Asking, are you okay during sex 100 times because I have trouble reading facial expressions. I also need more alone time than most allistics. People can be bothered by that. Being perceived as defensive, argumentative when I'm just trying to understand something. Hard to differentiate platonic versus romantic, especially being bi. I think it helps me communicate about it better because of my bluntness. It's hard because I really cannot casually date someone. Being told, you have changed so much, when really I've just become comfy unmasking. I also find that I find myself clicking with certain people and delve into very deep relationship very quickly. I found I was drawn to other autistic people when dating, as we seemed to click more. Communication differences, like not always understanding when your partner is in the mood for sex. A lot of communication needed. It's hard to know what feels right/good for my partner. My need for predictability can feel like control to partners. Have had to work on that a lot. A lot of anxiety around dating because of fear of missing vital social cues and clues. It makes dating hard. I don't really know how to start a conversation. Disassociating. Dating another autistic person is so much easier than a neurotypical person. Similar needs, similar vibes. I can only have sex with someone I know really well. Everything needs to be talked about. Dating induces masking, but when things start to develop, the mask comes off and there's a misconception of being fake and deceptive. Do I like them, or is this another fixation? It's also hard to tell if they are flirting or just banter. It's really hard to be clear on when people are flirting and what they think is happening. Hypersensitivity to surrounding stimulus makes it hard to be in the moment. I hate kissing until I'm used to it with a person. Early kisses are unpredictable and stress me. I take things too literal, so it can make sex/intimacy awkward at times. I love very intensely and often very quickly. I really enjoy sex and it makes me feel very connected. Possibly maladaptive, but I use sex as a way to connect with folks when I may not otherwise. Masking when you met someone versus unmasking later at home. Love to talk more. Miscommunication happens more easily and I end up being a lot more emotional. Had a huge meltdown before moving in with my partner. Too much change. I experience sensory overload during sex, which basically means I'm never able to orgasm. I get overstimulated very easily during the day and then find it hard to be touched or just interact. I find it difficult to know how I'm feeling in a sex situation. It takes a lot of pausing while I figure it out. I get overwhelmed extremely easily and find it hard to differentiate pleasure and overwhelm. Having to have planned sex sometimes. A constant need for reassurance that I'm not doing it wrong. Sex can be a sensory nightmare. It also affects how I communicate with my partners. Struggling to share a bed due to sleep difficulties and increased sensitivity following a bad sleep. I hate small talk. I want to dive straight into the interesting stuff. I can't read between the lines. Being too socially exhausted to have sex with my partner. I struggle with spontaneous sex because I'm thinking of how sanitary it is / recent hand wash. Stimming with partners. Searching for stimulus in a sexual environment and enjoying kink because it gets me out of my head. I hate surprises. I need all the details for dates so I can plan and prepare or I won't enjoy it. Wife often thinks I'm upset with her because my face and tone of voice don't match my words. I flirt in quite untraditional ways, biting my partner's arm, lying flat on him, lol, booping nose. Dating's near impossible due to the social cues. I have only ever met potential partners online. If I have a crush, I am very upfront about it and people think that's weird. Hyper aware of vibe changes, so take it very personally when I feel like something's off / they don't realize. Thank you so very much to everyone who submitted responses. Obviously, I can't read all of them out, but I hope that that gives a little picture of all of the different experiences that there are out there. So let's discuss some advice that can help autistic people or folks who are dating autistic people. Tips for navigating autism and sex and relationships. Ask questions. There is no shame in not understanding something. Whether you're an autistic person not understanding some unwritten dating rules or an allistic person confused by your partner's behavior. Respect boundaries. You might not be able to completely understand where your partner is coming from, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't believe them when talking about their needs. Use tone tags in conversations. It can be really helpful to clarify, to avoid conflict and confusion. But then the other test is that you actually have to tune in to your own emotions and feelings to be able to describe them to someone else. Remember that if you're an autistic person and you're in a relationship with another autistic or neurodivergent person, your needs might be very different. No two autistic people are the same. Talk about desires, boundaries, needs, and limits before having sex so you know what to expect. Once again, autistic people are not broken or weird, and just like allistic people, they can have meaningful relationships and fulfilling sex lives if they want to. You might approach sex and dating differently to allistic people if you're autistic, but that's not a bad thing. I actually think that neurotypical people can learn a lot from the way that autistic and neurodivergent people approach these things, especially when it comes to direct communication with partners. Lots of autistic people think that their autism helps them have great sex and relationships, and they feel a lot less shame about expressing their needs and desires. I've tried to pack in as much as possible in this video about how autism can impact sex and dating and relationships. Please let me know if any of this resonated with you in the comments, and feel free to share your own experiences if you want to. A massive shout out to my patrons who make these sex education videos possible. If you want to help support this channel and join our wonderful community of sex nerds, you can head over to my Patreon where there are lots of different perks. You can get early access to videos, exclusive podcasts, reading lists, and monthly live streams. There'll be a link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you're all doing well, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!